I really believe there is an appetite among our people to practice the way of Jesus, to actually put into practice the way Jesus lived in the here and now. But I don't think we as pastors are patient enough to allow our people to go through that learning process. Hey, my name's Trey Van Camp. I'm a church planter. I'm really refocusing this channel to help pastors shift from being Sunday directors to spiritual directors. And that shift really did occur within my leadership around the end of 2022. And we've really seen things ramp up ever since. And we really kind of changed our calendar, and we changed the way we began to preach the way of Jesus. Back in 2018, I started to learn very sacred rhythms like fasting and Sabbathing. I began to implement them into my own life. But then as I look at how I was teaching our people these things, I would just go book by book, verse by verse, which is great. And if I would see some sort of connection or notice that the person was fasting, I would then say, okay, the practice this week is to fast. But the next Sunday, let's say the practice this week is solitude, or it's honoring, and it would just be all sorts of like shooting from the hip, different ways to practice the way of Jesus. Now, I don't think that that's bad preaching. I think sometimes it's super helpful. But I recently had a podcast episode. Our church has this podcast called Formed by Jesus podcast, which actually helps tie in our vision. We have 9 practices from the way of Jesus. It's a roadmap of us zigging where our culture here in the East Valley is zagging. And she had this really helpful, just conversation that did remind me how we're doing things as a church is why it's working. How has your church community or together group encouraged you or engaged with the practices with you?
So that's the thing, like the stuff like Sabbath and stuff. Every time I'm like, oh, I'm so sad I missed that one. They're like, go watch it. I'm like, I can, but I want to
you're not gonna do
be
it
there.
Together.
I want our group to be doing it together,
That's such a good point. Yeah, you could go listen to the teaching on Sabbath, but that I think the bread and butter of what we're doing is we're focusing on it as a community together.
Right.
So to give context, our church goes through a practice of the way of Jesus for 4 weeks. And then the next 8 weeks, we still harp on that one practice. So I was interviewing Rebecca. She was talking about fasting because in all of February, we looked through kind of the 4 main elements of fasting. See if I remember. I talked about how the practice of fasting is the practice of fasting is abstaining from food for a set period of time to say no to cheaper desires and yes to deeper union, to confess your needs and contend for your neighbor. I almost forgot it. You can look that up at formedbyjesus.com/fasting. So every week we'd build on that idea. And then we have just been celebrating fasting by going through Lent. So we are asking our people to fast or abstain for these 40 days leading up to Easter. And we're having conversations. We're having story time. Everything right now is about fasting. Even in our groups, even though I'm just going through the fruit of the Spirit, we're still finding ways to talk about fasting. So as you'll see, Rebecca mentioned, man, I really want to learn Sabbath, but I'm learning this better when it is a communal thing. And so, yes, could some of us just learn about Sabbath right now? Totally. But what I've seen, what pastors are doing, for example, we last year had a whole hospitality campaign. I've had a lot of pastors say that is so cool. And so what they've tried to do, though, is take the idea, have one sermon about hospitality, and then wonder why their people aren't yet being hospitable. To me, I think it takes at least a month of teaching and 2 to 3 more months of celebrating and practicing and stumbling along the way in order for our people for it to sink in. We've been calling it these 3 elements to helping people understand a practice from the way of Jesus to hopefully implement it in their life beyond just those 4 weeks. We think as pastors, our job is to give them a theology. So we gave a theology of fasting. What is desire? What is it not? So many important aspects to the theology of fasting. So theology is important. Then we gave them a template. So for us, the template was saying no to cheaper desires, yes to deeper union, to confess your need, and to contend for your neighbor. So there's these 4 elements, a template of what you could begin to focus on and how you can actually begin to fast. But then we always say for the next, 8 weeks is a trial run. Trial run gives this idea that you can mess up along the way. They're called practices, not performances. And so it's this idea that we can stumble along the way. Think about teaching the Bible. You didn't just learn teaching the Bible perfectly overnight. You gave yourself trial runs, right? You began to teach and you stumbled along the way, and we all knew we're not going to be perfect at this. We're just starting. And so we have found when our people are really sinking deep into these practices is when we focus on it, teach on it for 4 weeks, and have another 8 to 12 weeks of shouting out stories, give people tangible ways to keep practicing this. And hopefully by the end of 3 months, it becomes an actual weekly rhythm in their life. Comment below if this brings up any questions you may have. Our church, if you want to know more about those practices, it's up at formed-by-jesus.com. We are just finishing our 7th practice, and we're going to enter into our 8th. And this is introducing all sorts of conversations about what we're going to do once we finish with the 9. According to Rebecca, right, it's helpful for us just to go back through Sabbath again. And I think that is what we're going to do. Thank you for watching. I hope you shift your mindset from being a Sunday director to a spiritual director. Thank you for watching today's video. This is the video I think you should watch. This is the video YouTube says you should watch.